by a yard, you've got enough for your binding and some fabric for your stash. So we're working with shorter strips here. So the next step, we're going to join these strips to make one continuous binding.
Right, and you'll get out your pencil or your fabric marking pen and a little ruler because you are going to draw.
Let me just straighten this a little bit better.
You're going to draw the line that you'll be sewing on.
This is so we can have diagonal seams that lie flatter on our binding.
This is really what elevates binding into something sort of special. It's that diagonal seam.
So they're not lumpy.
And this is very tricky. You need to take your time and not be watching TV or anything.
Okay, I'm going to pin that. Now it's important then that we're going to keep putting right sides to right sides.
Right.
These would be longer strips.
It's very easy to twist this strip, to twist this binding, so you need to make sure you're checking your work before you're sewing anything down.
Same angle. And I'll just give you a little word to the wise. If you're using a solid fabric or a batik or a plaid, they're the same right side and wrong side, and so you got to pay real close attention to what side is up, or you'll get a twist.
And you will, and you'll just,
And if you
remove it and do it again.
If you do the angle the wrong way, you're going to have a right angle in your binding.
Right.
I have done it.
Yep.
Okay, so I've got my sewing machine with my needle at the center, and I'd have a whole bunch of these, not just these two. I'd have a whole bunch.
Are you set up right?
Yes,
there?
I'm at the
Okay.
middle. I'm at 3.5. Okay, so I'm going to stitch on that line. Very simple. And my pin was just over to the side, so I didn't have to worry about that too much. And because I love chaining, I just bring my next seam in here, and I would have a whole batch of these done just like this.
And another good tip is that when you are cutting out your quilt and you are piecing together the top of your quilt, especially if it's scrappy and you want a specific binding, you want that fabric for your binding, not a bad idea to cut out your strips and make your binding or prepare some of your binding and set it aside so that you don't use it all up. By the time you get to your binding, you will have used that fabric up, and then you'll have
or lost it or given it to somebody.
So yeah, you can put it in a little Ziploc and sort of stick it on your design wall and just have it ready to go when you're ready to go.
I love to do that because that's my goal. Okay, let's take the big scissors, and I'd have a whole bunch of these seams, and I'm going to cut this, and let's get our iron ready to go. So I'm going to I just use scissors for this. You could use a rotary cutter, but to me it's more work to position my rotary cutter, and it's not a critical measurement here.
And then we've set these seams and press them open.
I'm going to do it by hand first.
Okay.
It's going to be easier for you to press if I do it. So it's going to make a nice diagonal seam.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah,
So you don't really need to set it before.
No.
Oh, okay. Well,
you just want it flat.
yep.
Yeah, I got a little pinch in there.
We don't press seams open very often.
No, practically. Some people that do patchwork press them open. I've run into that before. It's just a different way. That's not the way it works for me.
We tend to think it's stronger when we press our
Right,
seams.
there's a lot of reasons. That's a patchwork boot camp.
Right.
Pressing.
It's like
okay,
quilting
so
beyond.
now this is where it becomes French fold binding. So we're going to, and I'll make room on your ironing board again, is you're going to do this, and I think you probably want the tail over to the other side, don't you?
I do.
Yeah, because you're right-handed like me.
We were working on that binding last night, actually, and this is a great time to have a pal, because when you have a big quilt, you have a really long binding strip, and you'll see, Mom, you can just pull that aside.
Right, yeah, I'm helping you.
And it's this little train.
Yeah, we helped each other. We did a lot work together. It was really great to have a friend because a big quilt to support the weight of the quilt. So you just have this long strip of binding, however long your quilt is, and I'm glad you came to a seam, I also go along and then cut these little dog ears off, these little bunny ears, okay? So once you've done that, if you've got this long piece, and this is like you were talking earlier, Mary, about having the binding made ahead.
Right.
I'll make the binding for my quilt, and it's sitting there on my sewing table. It's kind of like a little, goal to get to my quilt finish so I can put it on.
Or that bubble gum. That looks like that bubble gum.
Yeah, it's a little candy too. Okay, so here, what we've done today, because handling a big quilt out here would be really hard for you all to see, is we have kind of a fake quilt. It's a piece of pre-quilted fabric, so you got to pretend that this is the quilt top, and then we've got the back, the back of the quilt, and so I always advocate waiting to trim away my backing, my excess backing, and my excess batting till after I've put the binding on.
Right.
Okay. I just think it's
not
better.
everybody does that. Our sewing specialist does it a little bit differently. you'll find a way that works for you, but you've just done it this way for a long
It's what
time, and I
I
think
like
a lot
to
of
do.
times the things that quilters do, they've just done it a long time that way, or that
If
was
it
the
works.
way they learned exactly. So that's what they stick with.
So I'm not going to start at a corner. I'm going to start at a side that's a forgiving spot because we're going to sew this on and then make a diagonal seam to finish it so that it looks just like all the other seams. So I'm going to set my machine here. If I move it, my needle position to 6, then I've got my presser foot as my guide. So, and I'm going to show you how to miter a corner.
And for the rookies out there who are really new to the quilt making process, just so you know, so you're adding this to your glossary of terms, there's putting the binding on the quilt, which is what my mother is doing at this very moment, and then there's turning the binding, and we're going to get to that. But sometimes I think when I think about putting the binding on, I'm actually envisioning turning the binding, but you have to put it on before
And
you
then
turn it.
by hand. Now what I've done is here is a quarter by eye on the quilt top, and we're going to show you a way to mark this too on the next corner, but I have just by eye, since I'm really used to a 1/4 of an inch, I've put a pin in just a 1/4 of an inch from the end of my quilt top. And so that's so it's a marker so that as I come along here, when I come to that pin, I don't sew on the pin, I come right up to it, I take the pin out, and I'm going to do a little back stitch. And then